Thank you. My name is Sami Langat. In the program there, I've been described as former. Then I'm just wondering, so what am I right now? I used to work with KCB with Lucy. Lucy is the one who organized this event. I also worked with the bank for quite some time. I was former CEO of Transnational Bank. But right now I export coffee, but also do quite a number of things apart from that. You see, when you work in the bank, you know everyone. You know everything about everyone, especially in terms of money. Today we are just here to make networks, interact, and make business contacts. This has been arranged by Lucy. Lucy Jeffrey is a Kenyan, Canadian citizen, also at the same time. And she's the host of this event, as we're just facilitating it. She owns the Blue Water Business Center Connect and a host of other businesses out there in Canada. We have Donovan Francis. And Donovan Francis is an experienced lawyer, is knowledgeable in Canadian law, is the managing lawyer at GOOSELAW, Immigration Professional Corporation, which is located in Ontario, Canada. I looked at him and I just said, aren't you Kenyan? So I thought he's Kenyan.
I feel Kenyan.
You feel Kenyan. Yes. We'll make you Kenyan.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sami. Thanks for the very kind introduction. So I'm looking around and I'm trying to figure out who has money in their pockets. Just based on what Sami said, I want to see, whose mannerism indicates that they have money in their pocket. At the moment, I can't quite tell, but I suspect most of us do. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for turning out, coming to hear what we have to say today. So what I'm going to be doing, I'm going to be talking a bit about our law firm, myself, what we do, that kind of a thing. And then we're going to be, after that, we're going to be looking at, well, I'm going to be listening to ways in which opportunities that might exist for Canadians who might have an interest in investing in Canada. But before I do that, I really couldn't start without kind of talking about our experience here in Kenya. We've been here for 2 weeks, my family and I. My family is here. My wife Taisha, Zola, and Zuri. Yes, it's a Swahili name. I told you, Sami said it. I'm kind of Kenyan in my heart. So yeah, we've been here for 2 weeks, and the experience has been phenomenal. I did not realize, just a little about myself. So I'm a Canadian citizen, a Canadian immigration lawyer. I studied law in Canada, but I'm Jamaican by birth. And my wife and I grew up in Jamaica. We did our undergraduate degree in Jamaica. So we went to Canada when we were adults. And the thing that I did not quite expect when I came to Kenya is just how much Kenyans have embraced Jamaican music and culture. I was blown away, and I mean, it's left me with one problem. My wife has fallen in love with Kenya. And so, I don't know if I'll have to go back without her. That would be a problem. But the experience has been, just phenomenal. The similarities are very, very evident. This is our first time in Kenya, obviously. We've been to Rwanda, we've been to Ghana, but Kenya, there's something there with the connection that just is something that we didn't quite anticipate. So it's been a really, really good first 2 weeks, and we're already looking forward to being back in Kenya sometime soon. So a little about the firm. The name of the firm is GOOSELAW Immigration. We are a Canadian law firm. We're comprised of three lawyers, two full-time lawyers and one contract lawyer. And we have in total about eight employees. We focus primarily on helping companies bring their employees to Canada. And what I mean by that is, many people don't know that the bulk of the immigration that happens in Canada actually happens between corporations, large companies, some of them are tech companies, and they have many employees who they must transfer to their Canadian branch so that those employees can do work in Canada. And those companies need work permits for their employees, right? So those are called intra-company transfers. So most of the work permits that are issued in Canada actually get issued through programs like these. So if you think about a company like Microsoft, they have an office here, right, in Nairobi. I believe they do. Microsoft and Google, and they have offices here. They would have had to transfer employees probably from their San Francisco office to their Nairobi office, right? You don't see that stuff every day, but they would, because the skill sets that those employees have are not necessarily going to be available just yet locally. And that kind of stuff happens in Canada as well. So we do a lot of that kind of work. But we also provide support with other types of immigration work for individuals and families. Right? So we provide support with study permits, for instance, for international students. We provide support where an international student may have run into issues. In fact, there's a case that we're handling from Kenya of a student who applied on his study permit and was unfair, and he came to us. And we were able to challenge that successfully, and they've come back asking for a settlement, right? A settlement is where they say, okay, we messed up, reopen the file and resend it to be reconsidered. So we do that kind of stuff as well. So we do stuff for international students. We do stuff for families who are wanting to migrate to Canada. And we also do stuff for investors. So people who are high net worth individuals who want to set up a business in Canada and use that business as a means to transition to Canada, we do provide support with those kinds of things as well. But our bread and butter is with providing immigration support to businesses primarily who are transferring employees between their home country and Canada. Are you following? Okay, all right. I would have done this presentation in Swahili, but I suspect I would have been the only person who would have understood what I was saying. So I've opted to resort to English. So that's a little bit about us. We've been featured in a number of media houses, and we've gotten an opportunity to speak at conferences and so on, such as Collision Conference, and so on. So that's who we are in a nutshell. So now, let's talk about, what most persons here would be interested in learning about, the different pathways for Canadian immigration. And I've broken those down into three broad categories. There are options for individuals and their families. Then there are going to be options for businesses, which is what I referenced a while ago. And finally, there are going to be options for investors. Individuals and families. Generally speaking, Canada has an immigration program that is geared towards attracting people with high skill sets, right? And those skill sets are either going to be in, job types that are targeted at people with higher levels of education, or they're going to be targeted at people whose skill sets are unique and who are not readily available inside Canada. And so what you find is that the immigration programs are designed in such a way to only attract people within, who have certain skill sets, people within a certain age range, and people with certain language skills. And I'll go through that kind of broadly. So somebody who wants to come to Canada as a permanent resident, for instance, just as an example, is, your age is going to be a factor. If you're between the ages of 22 and 33, then that's going to be favorable. Once you get to about 33, then your overall point score starts going down. So that's, it's okay. I fall in that category as well. So that's one of the factors that's taken into consideration. Another factor that's taken into consideration is your education level. If you have a first degree, that's going to be favorable. If you have a master's, that's going to be even more favorable. If you have a PhD, then good on you. And then a third factor that's taken into consideration would be your work experience in a professional type job. Okay, if you have 2 or more years of experience, those things are going to come into the equation. And then the third thing is your ability to function and to perform well in English or French, right? So those 4 factors are crucial factors in helping you to kind of assess whether or not applying for Canadian permanent residency is going to be an option. But that's one route that's going to be available to families and individuals who are wanting to come to Canada as permanent residents. All right? Another route is coming as an international student. Now, in maybe a year or so ago, this would have been perhaps the most accessible means for somebody to come to Canada, even people with their families. They would have been able to come, your spouse, your accompanying spouse would have been able to get a work permit, and your kids would have been able to get study permits, and eventually you'd have been able to transition. That has become more difficult, because the government has implemented some new measures effective January of this year that make it more challenging. It now makes the international study permit program more accessible to people who have the financial means. So for instance, the proof of funds requirement has been raised. Generally speaking, somebody wanting to come to Canada must prove that they have sufficient funds to take care of themselves and their families, right? The government wants to be sure that whoever is coming is not going to be dependent on social services and so on. So there's that requirement. But in recent months, the government has increased the minimum sum that you must show that you have in order to be eligible. So that's one change that has been made to the international study program. And the other change that has been made is that now only persons who are coming to do a master's or some kind of a postgraduate program are going to be able to get an open spousal work permit, meaning a work permit to take their spouses with them. Previously, it didn't matter what you were studying. You could have been coming to do a 1-year diploma. You would have been eligible to get an open spousal work permit. That now is only available to persons coming to study at the postgraduate level, the master's level, or a postgraduate diploma, or a PhD, or something like that. Are you following? So to summarize, the international student program remains an option, but it's an option that's going to be more accessible to people who have the financial means, people who can show that they have the minimum amount of money, right? And this is your money. You're not giving it to the Canadian government. You're merely showing them your bank accounts, right, to prove to them that you'll be able to take care of yourselves, right? And there are lots of nuances that we'd have to talk about, if ever you had an interest around this whole proof of funds requirements, and what you can do. Some people overnight, they gather the community and they dump as much money as they can into their account the day before they apply. And that doesn't work, So there are so many little nuances that we'd have to talk about. But broadly speaking, that's going to be one way that an individual and or family may be able to transition to Canada. And it actually is still perhaps the most utilized channel, right? Because when you come to Canada as an international student, upon completing your studies, you qualify for what's called a postgraduate work permit, right? Which allows you to work in Canada, assuming you can find a job in your area of study. And that's a whole other conversation, right? I like to be very candid when I do my talks and my consultations. I like to talk about the good, and I also like to talk about the bad, because it's important that we know that, right? So if somebody is coming to Canada to complete studies in, I don't know, maybe linguistics or some area that really isn't a high demand area, then your chances of securing a job when you're done working are going to be substantially lower than somebody who's coming to pursue studies, say, in the tech space, or somebody who's in the healthcare industry or some other high demand industry. So all of those things are also going to be important when you're wanting to make these decisions. All right? So that's another option available to individuals and families. And I'm keeping an eye on my time here because I don't want to get arrested by Sammy. But I think I'm doing well for time. Cool. Yes, okay. So individuals and families, those are going to be some of the options available: permanent residency, study permits. Work permits are an option, but they good to see you, Charles. That can be a challenge for many persons. So we get a lot of people who are reaching out saying, okay, I want a work permit. But the thing is, the way the Canadian immigration system is set up, in order for you to get a work permit, you must first have identified a Canadian employer, right? That employer must then be willing to offer you a job. That's number two. And then thirdly, that employer must go and get the go-ahead, the blessing from the government. So there are three things that you require before you can even think about applying for a work permit. Okay? So applying for coming to Canada on a work permit is a viable option, but it's going to be challenging. It has been challenging for persons who don't already have an employer. So, as I indicated earlier, many of our clients are corporate clients who already have employees within their employment, and they're merely transferring those employees from India to Canada, or from the US to Canada, or from some other country where those companies already have an office established. Right? So an individual wanting to come to Canada on a work permit must first secure an offer from a Canadian employer. All right? So that's the side of the story that you're not always told. Right? Yes, you may apply for a work permit, but getting a work permit is often going to be very challenging if you do not already have the support of a Canadian employer. Yes? Have I lost you? No? Okay. All right. So that's that for individuals and family. For businesses, there are opportunities for persons who operate businesses in Kenya, and who want to set something up in Canada and use that as a means to become established in Canada. Right? There are different investor type programs, and many of these programs are operated at the provincial level. So in Canada, immigration is federally managed by the federal government, but each province has some degree of autonomy to create and operate their own individual immigration programs. And so what most provinces have created are what are called provincial investor programs. And these programs are designed to help the provinces, meet their employment needs. So a province may recognize that, we don't have enough employers in the tech space or in the agricultural space. And that province may say, okay, we have an investor program. This program is geared at attracting persons from overseas who have the net worth, usually people who have a minimum of, say, 500,000 Canadian dollars, as their net worth, not necessarily cash in hand, but your net worth. Usually individuals who fall into that category and who have some kind of prior business management experience are going to be able to apply to establish a business in Canada firstly, and then having established that business, use it as a means to become permanent residents themselves and to take their family with them to Canada. All right? So that's just one of the investor programs. Another program that's available to people with high net worth is something called the startup visa, and that's something that we're actively involved in, and that does not necessarily require one to have a high net worth, but you must have an innovative business idea. You must have actually taken some steps towards, turning that business into a profitable business in your home country, and you want now to transfer that to Canada so it can be scaled and expanded. So that's called the startup visa. That's going to be available to people who are innovators, business people, startup people, those, and not just in the tech space, but a lot of these startups are usually in the tech space, right? So that's something else that's going to be available to Kenyans who are involved in innovative type businesses. So I've touched on the options available to individuals, I've touched on the options available to businesses, and I've touched on the options available to investors. And there's so much more that we could talk about, but I will allow you to ask your questions during the Q&A, and then the questions that can be addressed then we will address. Now, there's some things you need to be aware of before going to Canada, and one of them is that, and I hinted at it earlier, Canada is not for everyone, right? There are some areas that are more high demand than others. And so you will have to do your research to determine if the skill sets you possess are the skill sets that are going to help you to become successful in Canada. Because the truth is that, in Canada today, there are many persons who've come and who've struggled, right? And they won't necessarily tell you. So when they're coming, to your country and to my country, Jamaica, when they're going back, they go all dressed up, looking good. But the truth is that those who can go back sometimes struggle. And so it is important that if you're looking to transition, that you are clear on what your transition plan is going to be, right? And how your skill sets are going to help you to transition, if that is something you're keen on doing. So having that knowledge prior is always going to be important. Another important thing to bear in mind is if you are in a profession that requires you to be licensed in Canada, then you will want to be adequately informed, adequately prepared ahead of time so that you are better able to navigate the licensing process, right? So people who are in professions such as nursing, if you want to practice as a nurse in Canada, you have to be licensed. And the licensing requirements vary from province to province. And sometimes that can be a barrier. Taisha, my wife, she's a nursing professor, and she's seen many instances of people who've been trained, in their home countries coming and not being able to practice because the licensing can be a barrier. So that is something else you need to be aware of if you are wanting to come to Canada. There are licensing requirements. Proof of funds, which I just spoke to a while ago, you will be required to show that you have sufficient funds to take care of yourself and your family while you're there. So you have to be prepared to show that you have these funds. The other thing to bear in mind is that when you're applying to go to Canada, there are no guarantees. And anybody who tells you otherwise is not being honest, is not being truthful, right? We tell our clients all the time, when we submit an application for you, we cannot guarantee you that the application is going to be approved. What we can guarantee you is that you're going to get the strongest possible application. right? And the best possible advocacy. But ultimately, only the Canadian immigration authorities can decide whether or not they're going to approve an application. And I say this because, you know, one of the challenges that dogs Canada's immigration system currently is the issue of fraud. There's a lot of immigration fraud that's happening on the internet, internationally, where people are being led to believe that if they pay, you know, certain amounts of money, they will be guaranteed a positive outcome. And that cannot be farther from the truth. So that is something else to bear in mind if you are going to be thinking about going to Canada. And again, you know, I'm here to tell you about the ways to get to Canada, but I'm also here to be very frank and candid with you so that you are familiar with the pitfalls ahead of time. And then the last one, which, you know, after having been here for 2 weeks, I realized that, you know, Kenyans will adapt quite well to Canada's weather, correct? Yes, it's been quite nippy here, so I think you'll adjust, right? Only 1 month, okay. I think I was actually toying with you. I think you're absolutely right. The Canadian weather is something to behold, but you know, if the likes of us, you know, who moved from sunny Jamaica, if we were able to adjust, I'm sure Kenyans will be able to adjust. But, you know, a part of adjusting, and this has nothing to do with law, it's just me being me. Part of adjusting has to do with the mindset. You know, if you move to another country, sometimes you have to be willing to adjust and adapt. And oftentimes, those of our people who struggle are those of us who are not willing to adjust, you know. So like for us, we learned how to ski, or, I mean, I don't know that I'm any good at it, but we tried, you know, and we tried to go ice skating and we tried to adjust because you can't fight the weather, you can't fight the climate. So that's something else to bear in mind if you are thinking of going to Canada. And so as I wrap up, the one last thing I want to just touch on before my other colleagues come, and before I answer your questions and then my other colleagues come, is just to talk about, you know, investment opportunities in Kenya. So I'm part of a group in London, Ontario that is owned and operated by Lucy Jeffrey, the host of this event. Now, Lucy is a phenomenon. Lucy is a powerful Kenyan woman who came to Canada, you know, in some of the less urban cities, you know, one of the, not Toronto, a very Canadian city. You know, I know there are cameras in the room. And Lucy has been able to build this organization that is a network of Canadian professionals, you know, CEOs, law firm partners, you know, all of these influential people. She's been able to build that network. And so among these people are people who have the means to invest in the right opportunity if they can be made aware of it and if they can be made comfortable enough to make those investments. And so part of what I'm doing is kind of listening to kind of hear what some of those opportunities are, and so that, you know, when I go back to the next CEOs Club meeting, for instance, I can say, you know what, I mean, what Lucy has been saying all this time actually makes sense. You know, there are opportunities there. There's a new city being built called Tattoo City. There's Unity Homes. There, you know, that kind of a thing. So that's part of what I'm doing as well, kind of trying to get a better understanding so that I too can advocate when we meet with our colleagues when I get back.